Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be my non-spoiler review for Suki Alone. Suki Alone is of course the third comic in the trilogy of one-shots that has the rough theme of basically the awesome ladies of Avatar. So we started off this one-shot trilogy with Katara and the Pirate Silver. The middle book was Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy, and now we have Suki Alone. For anyone unaware, the basic premise of Suki Alone is that it is set just prior to the events of 314, The Boiling Rock Part 1, and it basically covers the story of Suki is captured by Azula back in 216. We don't see her again until 314 in The Boiling Rock. What kind of happened in between? How was she shipped off to the Boiling Rock? And then when she arrived at the Boiling Rock, what did she do prior to Sokka coming in and leading that escape attempt? Because it's not like Suki, based on what we know of her, to just sort of accept this, sit there like we saw her in the Boiling Rock and look very lonely and that she's waiting for something to happen. She's usually driven, wanting to make stuff happen on her own. And so this book presents the idea of, here is Suki's sort of attempt to escape. Form a community in the prison. Get people to like her and hopefully build towards an escape attempt. It's very much Suki being Suki, the character that we know, and getting people behind her and trying to eventually lead an escape attempt. And of course, we know it doesn't work because the escape attempt that works is in the Boiling Rock. So what tears this apart? What breaks apart her community? What makes her go from being hopeful of an escape attempt to suddenly just sitting on the rock, lonely, not sure if anything's going to go her way? That's what this book is covering. But there's more to it, and I'll get into that. So first of all, I think we do also need to talk just about this trilogy as well. Because now at least for me, I've read all three books in this trilogy of one-shots. Katara, Toph, Suki. How has it worked? Because it's not just that these are extra comics on top of everything else. They specifically made a decision to stop doing the comics from The Promise to Imbalance, to instead take this new approach, sandbox style. You can go all over the universe, but you're telling smaller stories. One-shot stories focused on individual characters. How has it worked? And so far, you'd have to say, after just the first two that you guys have read as well, it hasn't been great. We probably really haven't had a weaker period for Avatar story content in quite a while, in terms of the comics. The novels have really helped during this kind of light period for the comics, but these haven't been especially amazing. Katara and the Pirate Silver is just very, very middle of the road. It's Katara being Katara. It's fun. The characters are written reasonably well, but very little happens that is of substance. That if you don't read Katara and the Pirate Silver, you're not really missing out on all that much. Again, there's a lot of effort, time, quality in this book, but it's not particularly riveting or massively interesting. Nothing groundbreaking here at all. The Toph comic is better. It's a step in the right direction. They make a few more notable things happen. The first one, most obvious one, they set it in a much more interesting spot. It's during the comic timeline, so different things can happen. A lot of the comic plots are in play for Toph as a character, including the Metal Bending Academy, of course. So we introduce a new lava bender. That's eventful. Toph makes a change with her approach to sort of running the academy. That's kind of notable as well. She has an interaction with Chong, which is actually quite nice. Sokka and Suki are in this book as well. So it does a few things that are much better than this. They felt like really just Katara on her own can really just make this book function. And it didn't quite work. Here they're like, okay, interesting minor character, we'll support it with some of the other characters and some kind of interesting stuff will happen. But it still very much felt like you're still not willing to do anything particularly substantial because you ended the Toph comic right on the note of, and now off screen she's about to actually train the new lava bender. Something I really, really want to see. How Toph goes about trying to help someone learn a technique she can't learn herself. That's super interesting. And they just end with the idea it's going to happen off screen. That was really frustrating in terms of that concept is so much more interesting than most of what that book actually covered. They kind of did the reverse in Suki Alone, where you almost feel like you know exactly what the book is going to do. That it's just about Suki and the boiling rock, and we're getting from here to here. We're making a few connections, as we saw from the preview pages. Like, here's the Azula scene where she basically references what she is going to say to Sokka during the invasion to Suki herself. Suki being sent off to the boiling rock. And you get sort of the obvious things that you expect. Like, do we get to see the Warden at some point in this book? Yes, we do. And, you know, we're sort of familiar with this location and roughly how it's run. But here's a few extra specifics, you know, so we learn more about the prison overall because of this. But we fundamentally just were expecting it's get to Suki tries, but something gets in the way and the plan fails, and now she is kind of a little bit reliant on Sokka or someone else coming in to, you know, inject some life into a new escape attempt. And that would have worked. Like I said, it still is the best part. It makes this the best of the comics just on its own, if it was just about the boiling rock stuff. But there's more. And I didn't expect this because, like I talked about just there, to me, the scope of these one-shots have been so low. I in no way was really expecting them to do this, but huge surprise for me in terms of the fact that they did it and the extent to which they did it. We actually get Suki backstory in this book. And like I said, quite a substantial amount of it as well. About 20 pages or so of Suki backstory across this book, covering a variety of different sort of like time periods of her life. It doesn't just serve as sort of, you know, here's an insight into who she was when she was younger, but it really connects a lot of the dots, and they make more of a story about her arc between the episodes that we did see her in. So like 104 is her first episode, but here's a few scenes set when she's younger, before she's even a Kyoshi warrior, showing her want to become a Kyoshi warrior. Here is a scene set after 104, where they're dealing with the damage to Kyoshi Island, and Suki makes her decision to leave the island to participate and help out in the war against the Fire Nation. That's a big moment, because the way we learned about that in the show was just that in 205 Avatar Day, when Sokka and Katara went back to Kyoshi Island, Oyaji just told them that, oh yes, Suki left the island, she was very inspired by you, and that's how we knew she was gone until she appeared again in 213. So that was cool, but if it's so much more meaningful seeing her there. Like, Aang is like just left there, like putting out fires, clearing up rubble in the city, and just Suki makes her decision there and then on her own. And it links into other stuff from the previous flashback scenes. Like there's a whole arc that you wouldn't know about just from watching the show for Suki, and it involves like some of her other sisters from the you know, Kyoshi warriors, you know, to be and so on. Like her best friend when she was young actually plays quite a big role across these flashback moments. And even that is just a really cool thing of like, you see Suki and the other Kyoshi warriors like out of uniform. They're just wearing normal Yokoya, you know, the blue clothing. That's really cool to see them, that they don't wear the uniform at all times. Sure, when they're training and stuff like that, but when they're just helping to clear up rubble, they don't need to wear the uniform. So here they are just looking like Yokoya, you know, Kyoshi Island citizens. That's nice to see, because you then get to see how individual all of the characters that are the Kyoshi warriors look, and you get some of them named, and it's just really nicely done. But you do also get then like a scene of like, you know, Suki goes on to become sort of like a guard at the port, of course, you know, in 213. you get a scene set like before she meets the gang, kind of doing that role. That again links into everything else. That it's so well done. Again, only 20 pages out of the 72, but they do such good work with it because Suki is a character who really needs the backstory. Like, sure, if you did it with Katara and Toph, it would have been really cool and it would have given us more. But for Suki, it's her first backstory. That this is a character where we really haven't got much insight into sort of what forged her into the leader of the Kyoshi warriors. Here, you actually see that, it's this kind of, her leadership qualities is kind of like a trait that she's had since she was younger. She was just like the center of her group of friends even when she was young, and always had this drive. And that's just a nice little thing to see, in that they're not blowing you away with reveals page after page like that are just like huge, that would be massive spoilers. It's just nicely written backstory content of like Suki when she was younger, Suki in between these episodes, Suki during this scene. And it all connects together to mean like, yes, this is what was needed to forge Suki into a character who, yeah, she's a part of Team Avatar. As much as at times there are moments where it feels like the people making the franchise don't view her that way, and you get covers like this where like, why isn't Suki a part of this? Why isn't Suki on this cover? She's a part of Team Avatar. She was included in the Korra intro as part of Team Avatar, but why not a lot of these other things? She needs a little bit more development, and this is the stuff that is just going to really help the character just feel more like a fleshed out character. And coming out of this, I kind of feel like, yeah, it's this sort of treatment that, like, say, a character like a Sami really needs. A Sami needs something like this, where we're able to delve a little bit more into her backstory, focus on her individually to get more of what she's about. Like, Suki has always been like, competent, skilled, friendly, a leader. But we never really got to see the low moments, the weaknesses. You get to see a little bit of that here, like her backstory arc involving her friend actually adds some nice depth to her character. And then seeing her on her own here deal with, the ups and downs of trying to manage this community in the Boiling Rock, and this moment of just this idea of like kind of trust, in a way you would say, is kind of like a theme of this book. Her trust in her sisters from the past compared to how much trust in a way should she have with her fellow prisoners and stuff like that. That's a bit of an arc of like, it's not just this completely separate backstory that plays no involvement in any way with the Boiling Rock stuff. No, they are thematically linked in that it is those memories of the past, those moments that forged her into who she is, that keep her going while she's in her cell on her own and just has to train on her own and think about her situation. That's really good. And so like the cover sort of references that sort of thing. She's doing her Kyoshi warrior training in the prison, like on her own, reflecting on those moments where you get the backstory. It's really cool the way it's done. And while, yes, I think ultimately the backstory is the best part of the book, but the Boiling Rock stuff, which is most of the book, is still really good as well, because it is backed up by that backstory. Because you're getting more insight, you're covering how she dealt with her friends and being the leader of the Kyoshi warriors, her decision making up to this point. It's interesting to see her then make decisions in this moment with the other prisoners. And, like I said, you get those moments of like, the warden is in here for a little bit. You get to meet a lot of the other characters who are part of the community of people that form around Suki here. We get eventually to see what happens to break the community apart and how it links into everything else. How it puts Suki into a sort of lower position, a lower moment. She's been confident, hopeful, but what makes her sort of lose hope a little bit, lose faith a bit. That's the kind of big moment in terms of the Boiling Rock section of the story. And I think Faith Erin Hicks writes Suki so well that when you get to those moments, it works so well. Because I definitely would say I think Suki is probably the character Faith Erin Hicks writes the best. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that like her first Avatar work, I believe, was Shells, the free comic book comic, and that was pretty good. Even in Top Bay Fong's Metal Bending Academy, like we see Suki is in here, and you get the more sort of fun side of her character, where like she's not particularly like drawn into action in that comic, so it's just getting to see this fun side of her character. That's good to get in a character who otherwise is like the non-bender warrior of the group type thing. So getting those other sides to her, and then here getting even more like really fundamental, like this is who the character is type moments. It's really good. And again, I've been critical at times of Faith Erin Hicks for playing it like very safe with the characters, but here she actually has so much work to do to, like I said, connect the backstory stuff up with the kind of present day stuff, and fill in a lot of gaps of like stuff that like we're not inherently aware of like at all was ever part of the series, like characterizing other island members on Kyoshi Island. She has to do that all herself. So I think this should be viewed as like a real like, yeah, now go on from here, and in future one shots, future comics, look at what you did here and try and do that with the other characters. That's definitely, I think, the way to go. So I feel like I'm running out of things to say that's not talking just directly about the specifics. Again, I'll immediately say, like, ask questions in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. Again, I'm not going to be able to talk about spoilers until the actual release date of the book in July. I think it's the 27th of July. So I will have a full spoiler review out then. We'll do the podcast review then. But right now, of course, I can't talk too much about specifics and stuff like that in that. I know a lot of people have already, because I mentioned I have the review copy, asked a few questions that I don't really want to answer, because I feel if I even attempted to answer it, it would kind of be hinting towards spoilers. But all I'd really say just on that front is just that I don't think this comic really has any sort of like one moment that is like so big that if I said what it was, it would like ruin the book for you or anything like that. It's more of just general spoilers in the sense of like, I think you owe it to yourself to, when you get the book, to just read through it and your reading of that scene to be your experience with that scene, rather than it being like me describe the scene to you first and then you read it type thing. So that's why I'm more just hinting at the idea of like the backstory involves like a little bit of this and that, rather than talking about like specific dialogue and directly going into the interactions and so on. But yeah, I think the main thing I'd say is just that like it really earned the title, Suki Alone. I was a bit worried that like, oh, they're using this title for a fantastic episode of Avatar, Zuko Alone, and one of the best episodes of Korra Alone. I hope this can live up to it, and I think it kind of did. Again, given that like Suki doesn't have backstory kind of before this does that work really nicely, and I came out of this, as I said, like with my expectations more than met. Now part of that is just because my expectations were pretty low coming off these two, but I was expecting a bit more from this, and it gave me more than that bit more. So that's probably the biggest praise I can give it. The big question obviously is, what are they going to follow this up with? Like, what's next for the one-shots? Which characters are we doing? Are we even doing that? What's next for the comics? Because again, Korra comics haven't been announced yet. Next Avatar comics haven't been announced yet. The only other piece of new story content I suppose we have that's actually announced is the free comic book day book, which still comedically does not have a cover. So there's that. But I think that's where I'm going to wrap up this non-spoiler review of Suki Alone. Just know that I give this one a pretty heavy recommendation. Again, I'm trying not to like overhype it necessarily, because again, it's that weird dynamic of like, I'm vaguely overhyping it, but I know the context. You guys don't know the context, so you might like take me hyping it as like suggesting that there's all these sort of like fantastic and magical scenes that may not happen when you actually read the book. So I'm trying my best to sort of keep it in check of like, it's really good, and I think it's like getting towards sort of the peak of what you can expect from a one-shot comic. Again, is it the whole... We're not... I suppose we're still not quite at the point where like we're telling a story of like how Zuko got his dragon Druk and seeing the egg hatch and stuff like that. Big moments that we're sort of waiting to see. It's not quite that, but this is a book that really helps the character of Suki, and that's big. So there are my thoughts on Suki Alone. In the comments, if you do have any questions, ask them below, and I will try to answer them if I can without spoiling things. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.